Good morning, Dan and Amy, and this is rather remarkable. Something you won't hear me say ever. Orrin Hatch had a good op-ed at the Wall Street Journal.
Wait, who?
Orrin Hatch.
Senator Orrin Hatch. All
Yeah.
right.
Giving
He'll be
way to Mitt
leaving. He's
Romney.
a short timer.
Identity politics threatens the American experiment, right, Hatch? Identity politics turns the American idea on its head. Rather than looking beyond arbitrary differences in color, class, and creed, identity politics separates us along these lines. It puts the demand of the collective before the sovereignty of the individual. In doing so, identity politics conditions us to define ourselves and each other by the groups to which we belong. Identity politics is a cancer on our political culture. If we allow it to metastasize, civility will cease, our national community will crumble, and the U.S. will become a divided country of ideological ghettos. Wow. Orrin Hatch.
Who knew?
That's you wouldn't have expected that if I didn't tell you who that wrote that at the outset. You'd have expected something like that from our next guest, Jason Hill, who's a philosophy professor at DePaul, and he has a forthcoming book, We Have Overcome, An Immigrant's Letter to the American People. Jason, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan.
I want to start with sort of make this a little bit of a Black Lives Matter festivus, airing of the grievances here. You've written a piece recently in Commentary Magazine where you detail your problems with Black Lives Matter, and they are many and varied. So why don't you give us the highlights?
Well, the main problem that I have with Black Lives Matter is that it had strayed from its lane. It started out as a legitimate movement that had voiced its concern about the unarmed killing of black men by police officers, and then started attacking Israel as a genocidal apartheid state, conveyed the idea of shutting down banks, advocating free education for all blacks, the breaking up of the U.S. economy. And I thought that there were two fundamental problems with Black Lives Matter. The first was that it had started shutting down conversations on universities, protesting campus speakers with whom it disagreed with, mainly conservative speakers. So it had started massive protest stations on campus. The second problem I thought that Black Lives Matter faced was a problem with accountability. It really should be doing the proper work of going inside the black community and strategically working with police officers with a problem that is basically a black problem, black on black crime. Mm-hmm. It should be working with gang members and saying to these hoodlums and thugs who are committing genocidal rage and homicidal murders on its own people, what are you doing? Working with police officers inside the black communities, strategically working with these officers instead of doing the opposite, which is they're alienating police officers from black communities. And it turned their signs away from white communities and progressive Jews whom they're now attacking, and turn those signs inside the black communities and work with those communities to remedy seemingly intractable problems that those communities face.
Well, how do you feel? I mean, the Black Lives Matter signs are still up. I mean, how about
not just at your church?
No, not just that, but they are still up
Yeah.
at my church in the front, window
Yes.
and other places, and that home has no hate here. I see those everywhere. I mean,
Hate has no home.
Hate has no home.
Yeah.
Excuse me, hate has no home. Not home has no hate. Should we put up a All Lives Matter sign? Would that be a good reaction? To
Or
all
we
these?
could just stop putting up signs altogether.
Well, signs are some signs are strategically necessary, but the problem with these individuals, of course, is that look, they're media whores. That's the first thing to remember, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you place signs in the hands of people who are not ethically credentially advised on how to use these signs, then they misuse them. So, for example, I'm a big advocate of All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, Black. In the beginning, I thought Black Lives Matter had a point to make. I thought that they have completely discredited their legitimacy. So when I see a Black Lives Matter sign, I think it's so ethically tainted that I'm not impressed anymore.
Well, it doesn't.
Um,
It just becomes Black Lives Matter is just a new iteration of the same cultural Marxism that is advanced by the left. I mean, call it Antifa, call it Black Lives Matter. The racial composition of the groups may differ slightly, but the policy views don't.
they don't, and it becomes an issue of branding on campuses nowadays, where a university can say, "Look, we are committed to diversity." So a lot of universities have offices that host Black Lives Matter movements or members, and it just becomes an issue of diversity branding, where a university can say, "Look, we're committed to pluralism or diversity. We have such an organization at our institution," which means absolutely nothing. And actually, becomes politically nefarious when you have an organization that is calling for the breaking up of banks, the destruction of capitalism, and more nefariously, calling Israel a genocidal apartheid state with with no accountability at all. How can you do something like this and no one is calling you to account for these pernicious statements?
Your forthcoming book is entitled "We Have Overcome: An Immigrant's Letter to the American People." You emigrated to this country from Jamaica. We've previously discussed your personal story, both on this show and then Against the Current, too. People can check out an interview I did with Jason Hill at upstream-ideas.com. But the subtitle, "An Immigrant's Letter to the American People," what is the kind of overriding message that's contained in the letter that you write to the American people in the form of this book?
Right. Well, the book is available on Amazon, and it's dedicated to the American people. It's my love letter to the American people, and it's a book that tells um, why America is the most moral and the most exceptional country on the face of the earth. So it's a love letter to the American people, telling them why they are the most exceptional people, and why they have made it possible for immigrants such as myself and the immigrants of other people whose stories I tell in the book possible in this story, who can come to this country with absolutely nothing or very little in their pockets and make it, why there is a formula for success in this great republic of ours. It is the greatest republic on the face of the earth, and I explain in very, very clear detail what makes this republic exceptional and an unprecedented phenomenon in this world, and why the American people, with their can-do spirit, their benevolence, their anti-xenophobic, they're not a xenophobic people at all, contrary to the rhetoric that's floating around, why the American people and their republic have made it possible for immigrants such as myself and untold others that I tell in the book possible to make it, to really make something remarkable of their lives. So it's a love letter to the American people. It's an ode, a hymn to this country, and I've dedicated it to the American, to the best within themselves, I call it. And I think they love it because it celebrates the the American dream that I think is still alive in an age of rampant anti-Americanism, and I'm a great patriot of this country, always have been even before I came here. And I wanted to express this to the American people to let them know that in an age in which they're called vulgar and crass and shoddy and mean-spirited, that I think of them in quite the opposite terms.
Do
I
you
think of them as a benevolent people.
do you
Um,
do you address the self victimization at all? Shelby Steele talks a good deal about this and the idea of look, nobody's disputing the inhumanity of slavery and
yes,
how devastating it was, but for people that are alive today to sort of re-victimize themselves for the purpose of prosecuting that matter, it makes no sense. The only one who's standing in your way then is you. And why would you want to stand in your own way in terms of accessing the paths to success that are available in this country to people, regardless of color? This is, I guess, maybe the other side of the coin that you're discussing.
absolutely. I have a whole section on the cult of victimology, and I deduce myself and the self of other black people who are Americans who do not see themselves as victims. And one of the points I do make is that, you know, a lot of things may happen to you that are not your fault, but everything that happens to you, whether it's your fault or not, is your responsibility. It's your responsibility. Your life is your sacred responsibility. So there are lots of things, whether they're due to sexism, racism, ageism, all the sorts of neologisms and terms that we now come up with. They might not have been your fault, but they're your responsibility. Your life is your responsibility, and you're not a victim. At least in America, there are real victims. You meet in a car accident, you become a paraplegic. That's a real victim. In a country that provides you with an endless number of resources from which to recoup from tragedies or from any form of, I hate to use this word, but sort of systemic oppressions from which you think you might be subjected to. There are resources, there are ways in which you can pick your life up and make something. So I completely demolished the cult of victimology in this book.
Well,
And
yeah, and it seems to me, I mean, it's just like another way to think about it. Why would you want to spend your life as somebody else's political mascot? What a
exactly.
waste of a life, right?
Yes, and what a misanthropic view of your compatriot. Because if you're a victim, and you see yourself as a victim, what must that say about how you see your fellow citizen? You must see that person as your perpetual oppressor, and
Hmm.
that's a horrible, horrible way to view your fellow human companion or traveler. It's horrible,
No, you'd
and
meant.
and, and it's a
Oh,
lie. First of all,
so it is a lie.
I think it's a lie. I don't think most Americans are oppressive and want to see other people oppressed and kept down. I think quite the opposite. I think Americans like to see people thrive and
Hmm.
flourish. I have lived in this country for 32 years. I came here when I was 20, and I lived in the deep south in the mid 80s, where people thought, "Oh, you're going to the deep south. They're racist there." And I was a young 20-year-old struggling to put myself through school, and at every moment, I did not see. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, of course, but speaking in very generalized terms, I've witnessed people celebrating my achievements. Americans, I'm talking about, celebrating my achievements, saying, we're proud of you. What they don't want is a sense of entitlement. What they don't want is a sense of you owe us, we owe you something. When you stand on your own 2 feet, as I certainly did, and you accomplish something and you work very, very hard for it, Americans are actually proud of you because you give them some sort of spiritual fuel for their own lives. If you can do it, you send a message on the order of, I too can do it. The American dream is possible for me too.
He is Jason Hill. He's a philosophy professor at DePaul University here in Chicago. The book, We Have Overcome, An Immigrant's Letter to the American People, which you can get on Amazon. We Have Overcome, An Immigrant's Letter to the American People. Jason Hill, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.